There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel, and this is my Spring 2025 most anticipated releases, and I've got a whole mitload of books that sound right up my street. So let's get started. I've organized these by month, April, May, June, but the publication date varies depending on where you are in the world, and I just happen to find one publication date of perhaps many that fit within the month, and that's what I'm going with. You can do your own due diligence. The first one I have for April is the latest to be translated into English from one of my favorite writers, Tsushima Yūko, Japanese writer. This is Wildcat Dome, translated by a new translator, in terms of anything that I've read, by Tsushima Yūko, Lisa Hofmann-Kuroda. The book was originally published in 2013, 3 years before Tsushima's death. I was living in Japan when she was still alive, but I hadn't heard of her, I didn't know anything about her, and about a year after her death, I read my first by her, and have been a devoted fan ever since. This one is set after the big earthquake and nuclear plant disaster at Fukushima, and it's about two friends. I don't know if there's more between them than a platonic friendship. They were inseparable as orphan children at the same orphanage growing up, and as adults they've parted ways. I don't know if it was an estrangement or just life circumstances, but after this big earthquake and Fukushima nuclear disaster, they have come back together and plot ensues, and it just sounds wonderful. Wildcat Dome is a very interesting title. I'm assuming the dome has something to do with the nuclear reactor, but that's just a guess. Now, everything I've read that was translated from this author, it was translated by Geraldine Harcourt, who died when she was about 35 or something, and she was just a masterful translator. So I'm a little nervous to see what a different translator will do, but we shall see. Another one I'm really excited about coming out in April, Open, Heaven. Open Heaven by Shawn Hewitt. And Shawn Hewitt is a writer who lives in Dublin. He has an Irish, I believe, mother and a British father, and he's a gay writer. This is his debut novel, and in a complicated way, I loved his memoir I read a couple years ago called All Down Darkness Wide. There were a few things I didn't love, but most of it I absolutely loved. And so this is his first novel, and my friend, and yours, I'm sure, Bernie Lombardi of Bookstagram fame, has already read Open Heaven and raved about it, so I can't wait. I just can't wait. It's set in a remote village in the north of England, and it's about a teenage protagonist, a sheltered, shy 16-year-old boy named James, and we can guess perhaps what kind of a story it will be. Shawn Hewitt is a masterful writer and poet. I haven't tried any of his poetry, but that sounds like it's going to be absolutely amazing. Here's a novel by an American writer, Andrew Porter, The Imagined Life. I like that cover. Is that a Hockney? It's reminiscent of a Hockney, but I don't think it's actually a Hockney. And it's about a straight guy in California whose father disappeared in 1984 when he was 12, and now his wife and son have left. I don't know the same reason, like they just left him, or the son went off to university. I don't know those details, but he's on his own, and he decides to try and find his father. Oh, local Saskatoon writer and a fond acquaintance of mine, I have to say, Meredith Hambrock. Her second novel, She's a Lamb, is coming out, and I'm actually reading it right now so that I can interview her about it and post my interview with her on its pub date, April 8th or something. And I am really enjoying it. It is about a talented, messy young actor. In other words, she mostly works in restaurants and as a page at theaters because she just hasn't made a name for herself. But she's immensely talented, immensely effed up, and funny. And she auditions for the part of Maria in a Vancouver musical and doesn't get it. And she's crushed. And instead they offer her to be the childminder and drama coach for the younger actors that are playing the kids in that famous story. And she is mightily insulted by the offer, but takes it because she thinks she might actually be able to swing in and steal the Maria role later on. And it's really funny and has really interesting echoes of the actual Maria von Trapp Sound of Music story that is structuring the novel. It's really good. You'll see more about that on my channel, and that is one that I am actually in the process of reading. Next, this is a queer novel set in Ireland, which I love. Just on that basis alone, I'm already hooked. Fun and Games by John Patrick McHugh. and it's about teenage boy love, as you can see in the cover. I don't know why I don't like covers like that. It's not that I'm squeamish or I think it's too much. It's not too much, but it's such a close shot of two men kissing. It's almost hard to figure out what's going on, gender-wise or otherwise. It's just, I don't love that cover, but that's okay. I hope I love the novel. I believe it's a debut. Yes, it is. Here's one that is a fabulous title. Shape of an Apostrophe by Uttama, Kirit, Patel. It's about an Indian family in Dubai. The female character, main character, is pregnant and newly orphaned, living with her in-laws in their opulent Dubai villa. So I'm assuming that means her husband is from there, but I don't know that for sure. Just sounds interesting. Here is one, a work of translated fiction with a really lovely title. A Girl is Lost in Her Century, Looking for Her Father by Gonçalo M. Tavares, translated from the Portuguese by Daniel Hahn. And the author was born in Luanda, which is the capital city of Angola. And the story, as far as I can tell, is also set in Angola. And the protagonist, at least as the story opens, is a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome looking for her father. So that sounds fabulous. Oh my God. Here is one Quebecois novel from Canada, translated into English, The Harmattan Winds, by Sylvain Trudel, translated from the French by Donald Winkler. The synopsis says it's perfect for devotees of Ali Smith, and I'm not particularly a devotee of Ali Smith. I read one book of hers that I loved. The other one's not so much, but I'm not going to hold that against this book. A woman finds a baby in a shopping basket floating on a pond, and that family adopts it in Quebec. And, oh, there's 2 adopted babies. Yes, there's also another adopted child, adopted by a Canadian family in Ethiopia after his family died in the famine and brought to Quebec. And these boys become quote-unquote brothers. Oh, that does sound interesting. And that is published by Archipelago Books. Oh, here is a work that some people would call historical fiction, but I will not insult it by such a moniker. It's set back in history, The Pretender by Jo Harkin. But it is literary fiction. Let's call it what it is. My goodness. And it is the story of Lambert Simnel, who was believed to be the illegitimate son of Richard III, briefly crowned at the age of 10 as King Edward VI, one of the last of the Plantagenets. Oh my God. Love that cover. This one, I have to say, is one of the most exciting on this list. No Names by Greg Hewitt. Set in the punk era, 1970s, working class. But which country? I can't immediately find out which country, but it's either Ireland or one of the British countries. Set in the late 70s, punk era, and 2 working class boys. Their friendship, and there is more to their friendship, involving affection and sexuality, which is a scary thing back in the 70s, no matter where in the world you were. And they were part of a punk band. And then flash forward 15 years to 1993, and one of them is living on an island as a hermit, and plot ensues. It just sounds really great. And look at that. That has to be one of the best covers I've seen in a while, too. Wow. Greg Hewitt is also hard to pin down geographically. I think he might be American. He's taught in France, and he's a professor. He lives with his husband in Minneapolis. So, Minneapolis-based. But, anyhow, it's the premise of the novel that really intrigues the heck out of me. Not to be outdone, this is another one that just sounds amazing. It's called The Fantasies of Future Things by Doug Jones. Look at that cover. And listen to this premise. 2 black male protagonists. They are in charge of overseeing the destruction and gentrification of the predominantly black neighborhoods surrounding Atlanta during the 1996 Olympics. What a brilliant premise. And sexuality comes into it. So some of the themes are internalized homophobia, black men and their families, restrictive masculinity. And there's also a debut. So that one is going to the top of my must-have and read as soon as possible list, which in my case, as soon as possible means within the next 2 or 3 years. But it sounds amazing. 3 really fascinating books in a row. Here's another queer one, When the Harvest Comes by Denne Michele Norris. And Denne Michele Norris is a trans woman. She is the first black openly trans woman to Helm, I love that verb. We don't hear the verb form very often. A major literary publication, in this case, Electric Literature. And this is her novel about a black man about to be married to a white man. It's on the eve of that wedding, and the black groom, his father is a reverend and very homophobic. This is all in the synopsis, so I'm not spoiling anything. That father dies in a car accident the night before the wedding, and a dramatic plot ensues. Holy smokes! Oh God, April's just going to be a banger month for new releases of interest to yours truly. Here is The Lilac People by Milo Todd, about a trans man in 1932 Berlin. What a scary time to be trans anywhere. It's sure scary today, but even scarier in 1932 in Berlin, I think it's safe to say. Bertie's in Berlin, and he works for Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld at his Sexual Science Institute. Oh, that sounds fascinating. And look at that cover. I just love the cover. Love it. So that is finally. Those are just April. We got 2 months to go, people. For May, here is one by a Singaporean writer, The Original Daughter, by Jemimah Wei. I don't know where she lives now, but I can find that out pretty quick. She divides her time between Singapore and the US. And it's set, or at least it opens in 1996 in Singapore. An only child living with parents and grandparents in a single-room flat. And working-class Singapore. Oh, that sounds fabulous. Here's another work set back in history coming out in May, Albion, by Anna Hope. I was not familiar with her or her books, but she's written a ton. This is, I shouldn't say it's set back in history. I think there is a present through line, but it's a family, a very rich family in the UK, in their 18th century ancestral home. 20 bedrooms of carved Sussex sandstone when the patriarch dies, and family dynamics, colonial legacies, and class set against the backdrop of the climate crisis. Now, do I know for sure that just because the house is made of Sussex sandstone that the novel is set there? I'm not sure, but one of us will find out eventually. The best book I've ever read in my life, and that will never change, is Do Not Say We Have Nothing by the Canadian writer Madeleine Tien. It won a bunch of awards and should have won more when it was published in about 2016, I think. And this is her next novel coming out in May, The Book of Records. And this one I'm a little leery about. I'm certainly going to try it. Something I heard about it made it sound quite philosophical, and I think philosophy is nonsense, and I will not read books that are overly philosophical. But now that I look at the synopsis on Goodreads, I'm just going to pretend I never heard all that, because this actually there's 3 timelines. One is in 17th century Amsterdam. The other is 1930s Germany. The third era, or storyline, is set in Tang Dynasty China. Their stories fuse with those of philosophers such as Spinoza, Hannah Arendt, and the Chinese poet Du Fu. I think as long as there's characters that aren't philosophers and it's not overly philosophical, because it's Madeleine Tien, I'm still very excited. I've talked myself out of being nervous about that one, instead just to be excited about it. Here is another translated novel, this one translated from the Dutch, set in 1922. The Remembered Soldier by Anjet Danji, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, translated by David McKay. Themes of what were not called PTSD at the time, but the protagonist has lost his memory and he's in a psychiatric asylum in 1922 in Flanders, the Dutch-speaking northern part of Belgium, and he's in a psychiatric institution there. And there is a newspaper ad, and the synopsis here on Goodreads is very coy about what that newspaper ad's all about, but women start responding to the ad and visiting him in the asylum in hopes of finding their husbands who have vanished in battle. And that sounds amazing, doesn't it? I think it does. Here is an Egyptian novel, Sleep Phase by Mohammed Kher, translated from the Arabic by Robin Moger. A Egyptian man, I'm assuming was a political prisoner, is released into Cairo after 7 years, and Cairo has changed utterly. And plot ensues. That certainly has potential. Here's another one I'm extremely excited about. This is by a Silla writer. Silla, I was pronouncing it wrong. It's the actual true name of the Okanagan Nation, which is, if not exclusively, predominantly in British Columbia, colonially speaking. And Brian Thomas Isaac, his debut novel, All the Quiet Places, was just so wonderful. It wasn't perfect, but it was wonderful. I loved it. I've been carrying a torch for Brian Thomas Isaac ever since. He's an older writer to be starting his literary career, but oh my God, his second novel, Bones of a Giant, is coming out, and it is set in the same Okanagan, or Scylla Indian Reserve, about a teenager. And I don't need to know another darn thing about it. That is very exciting. Coming out in May from McHugh Press in Canada, The Fun Times Brigade by Lindsay Zier-Vogel. Goodreads doesn't have a synopsis, so I have to look it up somewhere else. According to the publisher's website, it's an exploration of motherhood, grief, and the search for identity. I don't think I need to know any more about it than that, but I might need to hear some more reviews of it before committing to reading it. The last one for May is by Laurie Ostland, a collection of short stories. Are You Happy? Laurie Ostland is a lesbian American writer. I'm not sure where she lives. Perhaps California, but I don't know. And I read her novel After the Parade. It was sometime within the first year or so of my booktube existence, and loved it in a complicated way, but really deeply loved it. Haven't read anything else by Laurie Ostland. I know she has one other short story collection out, and this is the latest one coming out in early May. June! A novel about, I think, a family saga type of novel, which I sometimes really love, about a Armenian-American family called Waterline by Aram Mergion. I better try to pronounce this name. Okay, I looked up the pronunciation, and I don't know if my tongue will do it, but Aram Mergion, I think it's his debut novel, but he's done a lot of literary stuff. Yes, it is. It's set outside Troy on an island. And I have never read anything by an Armenian or Armenian diasporic writer, and so I may change that with this book. This cover is a little bit too plain for me, but I have to say it's not off-putting. Fresh Green Life, a novel by Sebastian Castillo. And this is autofiction, and it's called a short epic, or an epic in miniature. We have a narrator, the author, Sebastian Castillo. But there's another Sebastian Castillo, a translated Spanish writer, and the translated Spanish writer, he has a thingy above the A at the end of his name, Sebastian, that the author of this novella, who's also the autofictional narrator, doesn't have at the end of his name, Sebastian. That's the only difference. And plot ensues. It sounds dizzying and might not end up being for me, but the actual author of this book, Sebastian Castillo, is a writer and teacher living in Philadelphia. I have never read anything by the British writer Alice Chadwick, but she has written a few books, I think. Most of them, though, are about sewing or crochet or things, but it could be the same one. Somebody will tell me eventually. This novel is called Dark Like Under, set in an elite secondary school in the English countryside in the 80s. There's a shocking death, and plot ensues. It's a little bit reminiscent of that Australian one that everybody but me loves. I hated that novel, that Australian novel that had a similar plot. Yuck. I hope this one's better. And you can get angry at me in the comments, because it's a very well-loved Australian novel, and I thought it stank. This one is a novel by a Canadian writer, a poet up till now. This is his debut novel, David O'Meara. The title is Chandelier. The family story. One of the people in it is a 20-year-old woman still recovering from the death of her best friend, and she has arrived in South Korea to teach. There's another man, that may be her brother, I don't know, but he's on his way to Barcelona, because there's a man going to make a speech attacking his supposed failures as an architect. I'm just going to read the sentence. Hugo Walser is bound for Barcelona to publicly confront the man he's convinced is presenting a keynote speech about Hugo's controversial failure as an architect. Okay, actually that might be a little too plotty for me, but I'll read some reviews of it. It's coming out in early June. Next is a translated novel, gorgeous cover. This sounds incredible. It's called The Rarest Fruit, translated from the French by Hildegard Searle, but Gaël Belem is a French writer of Reunionese extraction. That is an island, a department and region of France. So would we call it a colony? Réunion, it's an Indian Ocean. It's part of the Mascarene Islands, 700 kilometers east of Madagascar. I am only vaguely aware of it, and that's where the author is from. This novel is set on that island in the 19th century about a young Creole boy born into slavery who becomes a botany expert, and he goes on to revolutionize the vanilla industry. Now, this sounds like a Roz book. I'll bet you $10 she will read it before I will. Has a very low rating on Goodreads, sadly, but lots of marginalized writers' work just because white people are so stupid. So I'm not going to put too much stock in that. And the last one for this video is by Layla Motley. Remember her? She wrote a novel that's on my shelf that I haven't read, Nightcrawling. It was on the Booker or something. I will read it eventually, but this one also looks really interesting. It's called The Girls Who Grew Big. The protagonist is a 16-year-old black girl, what would you say, 16 years old, and pregnant. Her parents banish her, plot ensues. Set in Florida. Love the cover. I want to read all these books, and I'm probably committed. My reading is pretty much spoken for until close to the end of the year. Which of these, or which handful of these, would you be most likely to start first? Thanks for watching.